Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Monday, March 24th, 2025, and you're listening to Alex's News. The weather in Riverside is heating up with a high of 90.3 degrees and a low of 66.3 degrees today, so remember to stay cool and hydrated if you're heading outside. Coming up on today's show, we'll examine the far-reaching impacts of Trump's trade war and how it's transforming both economic relationships and political alliances around the world. Then, we'll take a closer look at California's rigorous testing and safety protocols that protect consumers from harmful contaminants in legal cannabis products. We'll explore the state's regulatory framework and what it means for public health and the marijuana industry. Stay with us for these stories and more on Alex's News. Good morning, viewers. President Trump's aggressive trade policies are once again reshaping global commerce as a new trade war escalates with multiple nations. Joining us to break down this complex situation is our economic correspondent, Ethan Parker. Ethan, walk us through how this trade conflict has unfolded.
Thanks, Grace. We're witnessing what analysts are calling Trade War 2.0. And according to Perplexity, it began almost immediately after President Trump took office for his second term. The opening salvo came on January 20th of this year, when Trump signed an executive order directing his cabinet to develop reports on trade practices and tariff recommendations.
That didn't take long to move from planning to action, did it?
Not at all. Just 12 days later, on February 1st, Trump signed executive orders imposing significant tariffs on multiple countries. According to Perplexity's reporting, this included 25% tariffs on Canadian and Mexican goods and a 10% tariff on Chinese imports, which took effect just 3 days later on February 4th.
And I understand China didn't exactly turn the other cheek?
You've hit the nail on the head, Grace. China immediately responded with countermeasures of their own, implementing retaliatory tariffs on American goods. Then on February 13th, Trump announced what he called reciprocal tariffs, essentially matching whatever tariffs other countries impose on American goods. Those are set to begin in just 9 days, on April 2nd.
So the tariff situation has been escalating steadily. What's the current state of play?
It's a rapidly evolving situation. On March 4th, Trump doubled down by raising tariffs on Chinese imports to 20%. And imposing 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexico, though with some exceptions for auto imports and goods covered under the USMCA trade agreement. Just 8 days later, expanded tariffs on steel and aluminum went into effect, including a global tariff of 25% on aluminum.
I've heard April 2nd mentioned as a significant date in this trade war. What's expected to happen then?
According to NBC Los Angeles, April 2nd is when we'll see what Trump has described as the big one: scheduled tariffs on external agricultural products and potentially auto imports. This is causing significant anxiety in global markets, as it represents another major escalation.
Let's focus on Canada for a moment. How has our northern neighbor been affected?
The impact has been substantial. Perplexity reports that Trump has imposed a 25% ad valorem tariff on most Canadian goods, and a 10% tariff on Canadian energy resources. Steel and aluminum exports face an even steeper 50% tariff, with threats of additional tariffs on dairy and lumber.
And this is happening during a politically sensitive time for Canada, correct?
Absolutely. According to CBC News, these tariffs have become a central issue in Canada's federal election campaign. Prime Minister Mark Carney dissolved Parliament on March 23rd, just yesterday, triggering a 36-day campaign that will culminate in an election on April 28th, which is 35 days from today.
How is Carney positioning himself in response to these tariffs?
CBC News reports that Carney, who had been in office for just 9 days before calling the election, has promised tax cuts for the middle class and a strong stance against Trump. Canada has announced retaliatory tariffs on $30 billion in U.S. goods, with plans to increase this to $155 billion if necessary. They're targeting products like orange juice, peanut butter, and electronics, items that will be noticeable to American consumers.
So it seems we're in for a bumpy economic ride. What are experts saying about the potential impact?
It's concerning, Grace. Perplexity reports increased economic uncertainty globally, with economists warning of higher consumer prices and potential economic slowdowns. And An op-ed published by NBC Los Angeles by Dewardrick L. McNeil warns that both Wall Street and Washington are underestimating the severity of Trump's trade agenda, mistakenly treating these tariff threats as mere negotiating tactics rather than concrete policy.
Well, Ethan, it sounds like we're entering uncharted waters with this trade conflict. Thank you for that comprehensive breakdown of this developing situation.
My pleasure, Grace. As we approach what Trump calls the big one on April 2nd, we'll continue monitoring how markets and political leaders respond to these escalating trade tensions.
In our health segment today, we're looking at the safety measures behind California's legal cannabis industry. Joining us is our health reporter, Chloe, with details on how the Golden State is working to keep marijuana products safe for consumers. Chloe, this is a growing concern as more states legalize cannabis, isn't it?
Absolutely, Grace. According to WVIA news reporting from today, California has developed what they're calling a comprehensive regulatory system to ensure legal cannabis won't harm consumers. The state formed the Department of Cannabis Control, or DCC, back in 2021 specifically to oversee the industry with safety as the top priority.
So what exactly are they looking for when they test these products? I imagine there's quite a high standard to meet?
I see what you did there, Grace. And yes, the standards are quite rigorous. As Georgia Public Broadcasting also reported today, cannabis can contain various contaminants that pose significant health risks. These include mold, bacteria, heavy metals, and products with inaccurate THC levels. California actually reported 63 recalls of cannabis products last year due to these issues.
That's concerning. What specific contaminants should consumers be weeding out?
Well, according to WVIA's reporting, there are several major categories. Pesticides like chlorpyrifos can cause neurological disorders. Solvents used in extraction processes, including butane and benzene, can lead to respiratory issues. There are also microbials like E. coli and salmonella, heavy metals such as lead and mercury that cannabis can absorb from soil, and mycotoxins produced by mold that can suppress immune function.
Have there been serious health incidents linked to contaminated cannabis?
Yes, WVIA references the EVALI crisis of 2019, which was linked to vape products containing vitamin E acetate. They also note an increase in emergency room visits related to cannabis use, particularly from edibles, among people under 25. This aligns with other reports showing a significant uptick in ER visits in California, partly due to the increased potency of modern cannabis products.
How is California addressing these safety concerns? I imagine it's a joint effort between several agencies?
Another good one, Grace. The DCC operates a laboratory in Richmond that tests for various contaminants and THC levels. What's particularly interesting is that, according to WVIA, California tracks almost every step in the cannabis pipeline, right down to how many pounds of plant trimmings are thrown away. The California Cannabis Industry Association generally supports this regulation, especially after an investigation revealed missed illegal pesticides in legal products.
What about cannabis from illegal sources? Is that a bigger concern?
Absolutely. A critical point highlighted by WVIA is that regulated cannabis is significantly safer than illicit products. The illicit market often contains higher levels of illegal pesticides. There have been concerns about potential fentanyl contamination, though as of today, scientific evidence for widespread fentanyl in cannabis is limited. The DCC focuses testing primarily on pesticides, heavy metals, and solvent residues as these are considered more common contaminants.
It sounds like California is blazing a trail in cannabis regulation. What's the bigger picture here?
As WVIA puts it, states are essentially creating their own mini FDAs to address these issues, highlighting the challenges posed by the absence of federal regulation. California's efforts represent one of the most comprehensive attempts to regulate cannabis safety without federal guidance, providing a potential model for other states with legal markets. The balance between ensuring consumer safety and maintaining a viable legal market remains a challenge they're working through.
Thanks for that illuminating report, Chloe. I think we can all agree that when it comes to cannabis safety, it's better to be blunt about the risks. Here are some other headlines. In Beijing, China's Premier Li Qiang met with U.S. Senator Steve Daines, the first member of Congress to visit since Trump took office in January 2025. Lee emphasized that U.S.-China relations have reached an important juncture and advocated for dialogue over confrontation. The meeting included top American business leaders from companies like FedEx and Boeing. This diplomatic engagement comes amid escalating trade tensions, with the U.S. recently imposing a 20% tariff on Chinese imports and China retaliating with 15% duties on U.S. farm goods. The fentanyl issue remains contentious, with the U.S. criticizing China's efforts to curb precursor materials. U.S. negotiators are engaged in ceasefire talks between Ukraine and Russia in Saudi Arabia. On Sunday, discussions with Ukrainian officials were described as productive and focused by Ukraine's Defense Minister Rustem Umerov, addressing energy infrastructure protection. The following day, U.S. representatives met with Russian officials to refine details of a proposed partial ceasefire. Despite principal agreement on a limited ceasefire, differences remain regarding which targets should be off-limits. In Israel, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is moving to oust several top officials, including the dismissal of the internal security chief, which has sparked nationwide protests. Netanyahu's government is also initiating the process to fire the Attorney General, raising concerns about potential conflicts of interest and a constitutional crisis, as critics warn about attempts to exert control over independent state institutions. U.S. airstrikes targeting Yemen's Houthi rebels have killed at least one person and wounded over a dozen others in Sanaa''s western neighborhood. This is part of an ongoing campaign that began on March 15th and has now entered its 10th day. The strikes, conducted by fighter jets from the USS Harry S. Truman and Air Force attack planes, target Houthi positions in response to their attacks on commercial vessels in the Red Sea. Since November 2023, Houthis have launched over 190 attacks on shipping, sinking 2 vessels and killing at least 4 seafarers. The campaign has resulted in at least 53 casualties since it began. That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King, with Claude Sonnet 3.7, Gemini Flash 2.0, the Perplexity API, and the Google Cloud Text-to-Speech API. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.